Hello, and welcome to episode 18 of Trails in the Pod. I'm Colin. That's Kevin.
Today we thought about doing an episode on Buffalo Bill and Silence of the Lambs, but we decided that would be a betrayal of our loyal listeners, and we're going to stick to the schedule of chapters 2 and chapters 3 of SC, Trails in the Sky. There is so much in these two, especially chapter 3. It's jam-packed, so much good development, so many good side quests. I think the game really hits the stride here today, Colin.
I agree with that. Before we jump into that, we have to explain your weird ass cold opening about Buffalo Bill and the Silence of the Lambs. I want our audience to know that I have just finished cooking and eating dinner, which meant that my face was hot, and I complained that I was sweaty and my face itched, so he compared me to a cannibal.
Buffalo Bill is not a cannibal. If you had watched the movie, you would understand my brilliant and on-topic reference.
Isn't that the one starring Hannibal Lecter?
Hannibal Lecter is a fake person, Colin. He's not starring Hannibal Lecter. It's Anthony Hopkins.
Whatever. Why don't you take us off, Kevin?
That's a fake person. You know what's real? The game. I mean, it's not, but as a physical unit, you can buy it. So in a sense, it's real.
We don't even own these physically. They're not even real.
This is going to be edited out.
No, it's not. I'm editing today.
Okay, so S rank bracer of the week. What's the defining person, place, element, theme, or idea that to me shapes our understanding of chapter 2 and chapter 3? It's the idea of letting go and how some people are and some people are not able to let go. To me, I think these chapters are all about how difficult or how unwilling some people are to escape the after effects of the past. How hard it is to do that for good or for ill. And ironically, for a lot of Ouroboros, Colin, for all of their agents, that they're so bent on creating what they see as a better world. So often, when we get their backstory, they are fixated on the past. Walter, in this chapter, Joshua, as a former agent, his past with the society drives this entire game. I think it's a really cool contrast between the past, present, and future with the villains of the game.
I see what you're talking about. I don't think it would be fair to say that all of Ouroboros is fixated on the past. For instance, I don't even know if it would be fair to say that Walter is fixated on the past. What we know is that there was an inciting incident in the past that drove him into the hands of Ouroboros. But that says nothing about what he's trying to do now.
But let me counter that, if I may, briefly. He talks about when he sees Zen, how awesome it is to settle scores, even better than doing so with Kilika. So that seems to suggest this and other dialogue. He wanted to have some sort of resolution, maybe lethal, with Kilika, and he would have killed Zen if he could have.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean fixated on the past. You can be forward driven and still have demons in your closet.
Yes, but the way it was presented made it seem like well, he took up the Taito's fist for various unclear reasons. And then that's been, that reason and what he did to Ryuga, killing him, it's been driving him all this time. And maybe it's in reaction he joined Ouroboros and so forth, but I would say we don't know. We can't say for certain he shares, for example, Blue Blanc's fixation on the world to come, the world to be.
I would argue that we have no idea that Walter is driven by what he did to Ryuga. We know that Zin has mentioned that and has given us that part of the backstory, but we have no fucking clue what Walter's attitude towards his late master is.
So that is an interesting contrast. Zin's impression of events, why he thinks Walter does what he does, and what would Walter himself say about why he does what he does?
Well, even Zin doesn't say Walter is driven by the fact that he killed his master. He says that he's driven by the pursuit for power, and in the course of that, ended up killing his master. That's two different things.
Colin. I'm not going to abandon my S rank bracer of the week, despite it being full of holes.
All right. Well, my S Branker of the week is Ren because I think that her personality and her character, I mean, it drives the entirety of chapter three, which we'll end up talking about when we talk about chapter three. But she is the most colorful Ouroboros member that we've seen so far. We also know her the best because she joins our party. And the fact that, she betrays us at the end, kind of, it's a really interesting narrative choice that they made. I mean, I know that you think it's a bit of an anime trope, and it is. But in terms of giving us I don't even want to say a human face. I think that it exacerbates the inhumanity of Ouroboros in this game, but it does it in a very interesting way.
She's so alive. She is present in every scene she's in. Some characters in this game and other games, like, oh yeah, they're here, they're in the scene. But when Ven is with us, she is with us.
Yeah.
She is a full character.
I mean, to the point where we have to protect her in battle for like a lot of the time we're running around. She's with the party up until the time when she decides to leave and go have a tea party. So before we move on to actually talking about chapters 2 and chapter 3, we did ask a question last episode, and we posted it on Twitter. We also posted it on Twitter the day before the episode went live, which we're going to try not to do anymore. So Griswold states that Nier Automata as a whole and Tantal Knight from Xenoblade 2 holds a special place in his heart. He just stopped what he was doing and listened to the great soundtrack. We mentioned Nier Automata on the episode as something that I've been told is very good, but I just haven't listened to it. Pork Bob says that even though he hates Final Fantasy VIII, no, he doesn't say that. I hate Final Fantasy VIII. He says it's difficult for me to. He says it's difficult for me to say this is my favorite soundtrack definitively, but I at least got to throw Final Fantasy VIII out there. And Final Fantasy VIII does have a banging soundtrack. It's like the best part about that game. Its combat system or its leveling system is shit. But anyway, and then Ben mentions a couple of things. Persona 5, he says is amazing, but especially the song is Rivers in the Desert or Last Surprise. Last Surprise is amazing. That's a great song.
Good song.
He also likes Counterattack from Xenoblade Chronicles 2. And then he came back, I believe it was like 2 days later, to be like, how could I forget to mention Velvet's theme from Tales of Berseria? Which, I gotta be honest, I don't remember Velvet's theme from Tales of Berseria. Tales of Berseria is an amazing game, and Velvet is a fantastic heroine. I mean, Kevin, you were talking about, way earlier, you had asked me about games that really, JRPGs that fixate on the dark path, on moral ambiguity, or even like you're on the dark side. And I didn't recommend Tales of Berseria then because you only had a Switch. But now that you have a Steam Deck, you got to look up Tales of Berseria. That game is fantastic.
Is this one of the relative few of the Tales series you don't dislike despite playing every single one?
I have not played every single one, and I like a lot of them. Just because I don't like Tales of Arise that much doesn't mean I'm not a fan. In fact, you could claim it means I'm a real fan because I like the classics. Tales of Berseria is quite good.
You could be a good Star Wars fan. You like the franchise, but hate every single entry in it.
I mean, that's kind of what being a Star Wars fan right now is, right? When something Star Wars is good, it's a shock.
Andor is very good.
Yeah, I haven't watched it yet, but the fact that you think that it's good makes me want to watch it. But this isn't a Star Wars podcast, Kevin.
No, it's a Falcom podcast about the epic Trails Kaseki series.
So we stopped off last time with Chapter 1. Chapter 1 was insubstantial. So last minute we decided, Chapter 2 is also insubstantial. There's stuff to talk about, don't get me wrong. But Chapter 3 is so much more substantial and so much more interesting that we just had to wrap it up into one episode. Why don't we start with Chapter 2? And we need to start with Chapter 2 with the fact that Trails in the Sky SC does something that FC doesn't really do, which is at the end of the chapter, like you start with a new chapter, go back and check the board for the town that you are in, because there will be side quests. And some of the most memorable side quests in the game will be present that way, and you could easily miss them. It's not true for the end of Chapter 3, just spoiler alert, but for the end of Chapter 2, when you're still in Rouen, we got this poker side quest. I know that you were a big fan of that.
Yeah, I was, for a couple of reasons. Well, the first, we're not going about killing something. It's a different way to play the game, to interact with the game. So there's a gambling addict who's spending money, too much money, at the casino. And his wife wants the bracers, for whatever reason, to come and rescue her failing marriage. Girl divorces ass. And then, so we do. We have to cheat, we bluff, we play poker. It's a great quest because you can fail.
We don't cheat. We do bluff. That's poker.
Shira cheats.
I don't think Agate cheated, but that's neither here nor there.
Shira cheats. She pulls a card from her sleeve.
Okay.
And it's a great way. Success is not guaranteed. The player has to think about it. And like this little discussion between me and Colin just showed, there's a difference in how it happens between Shira and Agate, the party member that you chose. So that's also good to see. Your choice has consequences. It's meaningful.
I mean, it changes this quest almost completely. And I know this because, as you mentioned, you can fail it. And I'm not a good poker player in real life. And I'm definitely not a good poker player in which you're given, 2 dialogue boxes and you got to just hope that you're right. So when I failed it, and the woman was just like, yeah, it's okay that you failed it. I'd still trust you later. But doesn't give you any money and you fail the quest. Then you reload the save. And then you try it again and you look up game facts so that you can do it right. And all of a sudden you notice that there are 2 different walkthroughs for both routes because the order that you do things is completely different. It's a completely different quest.
And that's good. Choices should be meaningful.
I mean, I still wouldn't call this a meaningful choice between Agate and Shara. It's meaningful in the fact that it impacts something. It's not meaningful in the way that it impacts your player experience.
Oh my God.
Look at that butt.
It's a meaningful choice. It does not have to change the secret A double gold and silver ending of the game to be meaningful.
It's like meaningful in the way that if you choose to use the left-hand stall or the right-hand stall, the bathroom's a meaningful choice. It might change what graffiti you're looking at, but you're still pooping.
Okay, then.
Anyway. So there are some other side quests. One thing that I did notice that I missed this time around was that in chapter 1, there's a certain point in which you should actually go back and check the board, and you can take one to be a Sunday school teacher, which helps teach you a little bit more about the lore of Zemuria. And it's one of those quests where you are educating the children of the orphanage. And I completely forgot about that. And so then I went back to the board and it pointed out that I failed that quest.
F. Those kids are going to go straight to hell after failing the exams.
Those kids are not going to get into the Genis Royal Academy, I tell you that much. And it's because of you and me. But I think that's the most memorable side quest from After the Fact. I can't really remember any other ones that were like super good. And there are some other quests that we could do, but we decided to head off to Zeiss because we have to. We get onto the airship and we go there. And the animating plot for this chapter is that there are mysterious localized earthquakes. One right when you land, but then there's also a localized earthquake by Leiston Fortress. There's a localized earthquake in Zeiss. And there's a localized earthquake in Elmo, the hot springs.
Elmo. Okay. And then, so we have to plant sensors. You do some fighting. And then you capture, okay, where is this coming from? And it's the limestone caves in the underground tunnels that connect Zeiss with Bose.
Yeah, before we do all of that, what we notice is that every time we go to a place in which there was an earthquake, somebody had been there before who is, to quote one of the characters, tall, dark, and handsome. And the only thing that we know about him is that he's wearing sunglasses all of the time and he looks sexy. That will end up being Walter. But it was another one of those things, kind of like with the ghost, where you have this figure in the background who you like just miss every time, and you know that you're going to end up meeting him at the end of the chapter. But it's very formulaic. It follows the same formula as chapter 1.
Yeah, which, I mean, this chapter is fine for the main story, but it's only about fine, I'd say. If it didn't have the combat tournament side quest, the interactions with Cassius, I would say it's about as weighty or lack thereof as chapter 1. A solid B.
I agree with you on that. The side quests do elevate this chapter a bit. And I'm glad that you brought up the combat tournament, because what I love about this is that we see Cassius in his element, right? This is not Cassius, driver of the plot. This is not Cassius, the Deus Ex Machina. This is Cassius as a general training troops. And you see him interact with Estelle a bit in her new professional role, but you also see him act as a professional, which just is really good for world building.
And it's good for our understanding of Cassius as a human being, not just, like you said, the plot device, but also not just Cassius the dad. How does he interact with people who aren't his family? And he's pretty good. He's smart. He's perceptive. He's in the know. He sees Olivier and he knows what's up. He knows
Yep.
who he is.
So, fun fact, if at the end of FC you bring Olivier with you in that final fight, he will ask to speak to Cassius at the end of the game. And so then we can pinpoint when he's talked to Cassius about his plan.
Yes. And it's just good to see these little details that make the world feel like Estelle is not the sole person going about doing stuff. There's other people doing stuff. There's other things that are happening that touch her incidentally or not at all.
Yeah, or might touch her later, but are not meaningfully relevant at the moment. This is jumping ahead a little bit, but something that I noticed when we were talking to the Queen, it's you, Zin, Chloe, and Olivier, and the Queen greets everybody, but right before she greets Olivier, there's like a dot dot dot. There's an ellipsis, and she goes, Mr. Lenheim, and you kind of gotta wonder if she knows a little bit of something too.
Yeah, she would have to, which it's such a weird move on the part of Erebonia to send not the crown prince, but a prince of the blood into a country you just got done trying to conquer a decade ago.
So I'm not going to be mad that you said that because we already spoiled that in an earlier episode, but technically we don't know that yet.
Okay, but I hope something happens, like that we get an explanation, because if something happened to Olivier, there could have been war, even if Erebonia didn't want it. They may have been forced to by your prince died in this formerly, maybe currently hostile country. I mean,
All I am going to say is nothing because that would be spoiling if I said anything, but that's all I'm going to say. All right. So we head down to Limestone Cave. And we find that the reason why these earthquakes are happening is because the dire wolf has a gospel that he is using in order to manipulate the septium veins. So he summons some monsters to attack us, and then we fight them.
we beat them. I think it's a good boss fight. It was challenging. It was a bit difficult, but not tediously hard. Where it's like, oh fuck, I lost again. It was a good difficulty spike, I thought. But then something happened that we've seen happen a fair bit recently. And I may be a bit more negative on this than Colin, so let's hash out our differences, if any exist. We have a boss fight against monsters, we fight, then something happens to kind of negate the victory to put us in a defeated or a weak position. Walter, the direwolf, immobilizes us, and that requires outside intervention, a deus ex machina, if you will. In this case, Zin showing up. Is this an issue, Colin, do you think, or not?
Not in this context. We see the same thing happening with Blue Blanc as well, and I remember you didn't like that too. Here's my thing: if it's legitimate, we fought very hard. The game acknowledges our victory over the monsters. But we didn't fight the direwolf. We didn't fight Walter. Walter's still at the top of his game, and he's very powerful. So the game is showing us how much more powerful than us he is. And we're very lucky that Zin had come in and opens up a moment for there to be some character development between the two of them. We've talked a little bit earlier in this episode about their backstory, but this is the first real backstory we get from Zin. So it opens up that opportunity. What I don't like is when you fight a boss and you beat the boss, and then the cutscene acts like you lost against the boss. But that did not happen here.
So it's not sudden cutscene impotence. And so that we were fighting agents of Walter, but not Walter himself.
Yeah.
Should it have been, what would you feel if it was like the fight against Louver Lawrence at the end of FC, where you're kind of supposed to lose maybe, but there's a chance you can win. That would change the immediate dialogue,
Mhm.
but not the overall plot. Would that have been any better, different, worse?
I think that could have been pulled off well. There are other fights later on in the series. I'm thinking specifically of Crossbell. It happens in Cold Steel too, where there are enemies that you will definitely lose against. However, and you're still in the fight, it's clear that they are so powerful that you're not going to be able to beat them. However, there is like an optional objective to get the boss's health down to a certain level, and then you earn additional BP by doing that. And I think that's a really great balance because it still provides a gameplay incentive for you to try your best, which is what your character should be doing. But it reinforces narratively that these creatures of the boss is they're just stronger than you, and that's realistic as well. So if they had done something like that with this fight or with any of the enforcer fights, where in which you will end up being saved anyway, but specifically for this one, the last one, Dorothy like saved us by a fluke. It's not like she was going to come down. With Zin,
No.
he was on his way while we were fighting. He would have saved us with whether we needed it or not. So I think it would have worked well for that scene.
So a question I have for you that's a bit broader, Colin, is this. So we see the enforcers and the Anguis. Only one Anguis so
Yeah.
far. Do you think that we should be encountering, say, for lack of a better term, the foot soldiers, the direct operatives of the society, as less powerful, but still powerful, but not on this almost unbeatable, unapproachable tier above where we are?
Well, that would assume that Ouroboros has that Ouroboros has foot soldiers. We have not seen any of those. And so the evidence so far would suggest that they don't.
Should they, for gameplay and for narrative reasons, then?
No, I don't think that they have to. Maybe I'm biased because I've played all of these games, and so I know a bit more about Ouroboros and all of that. But I think that the game does a good job at showing. I mean, yes, the enforcers are powerful, but Ouroboros is not a society that's like meant to stand there in front and center and have their agents move around the board and change things in the open. They are in the shadows, at least for now. And so by keeping it small and having us like go up against these very powerful people and see how powerful they are, I think it goes a long way into reinforcing the mystique that Ouroboros is supposed to have.
And these guys are powerful, and it's not surprising then that they have these machinations, these schemes that are so wide-reaching and so broad.
Yeah. And also, this is kind of talked about later on in chapter 3 when we talk about Kevin Graham, but they have access to artifacts. And the fact that they have access to artifacts kind of makes them a counterpart to the church, to the secretive wing of the church, the Gralsritter, that is meant to control the artifacts.
Which I have to say, I like. In most other franchises, the church would be the society or something of that nature. But from the little we've seen in the novel, Cornelia,
Mhm.
and with Kevin Graham, they seem like pretty good people. Maybe they get, say, for Cornelia, they fight or they like the battle too much, but they're on the side of good. And it's a nice change.
What I really like about this revelation that Kevin is part of the Gralsritter, I mean, we're still in the first half of the game, so it allows Kevin's character to increase over time, to grow over time. More than that, too, we've already heard of the Gralsritter if we had read the Cornelia novel series, which
Yep.
is that's just another facet of Falcom world building is that they plant these seeds beforehand and then they explore them later on, which is why before we finish our series on SC, we will have to have an episode about the Dull Knight and about Jack the Gambler.
We had a brief glimpse of the Dull Knight with Renz finding her with the instructions in the library, chapter 15, which that was not a good clue, I think.
No,
Like, it was so vague.
no, that was a clue that I immediately went to the wiki to find where I had to go. I mean, the Foreign Manse narrows it down to either the
Yes,
Erebonian or the Calvard, and you'll figure it out eventually. But the game basically expects you to just sit there and read the entirety of the Dull Knight till you get to the right one.
which, I mean, that's one way to make us fucking read it, but
Did you read it?
No.
No, I would have, but
Okay.
I was on a time crunch. I had to beat the whole thing in a night, so I didn't have time.
Yeah. So we're saved by Zen. And he knows Walter and Kilika from when, we learn, when they studied under Master Rayuga, martial arts. It's heavily implied here that Kilika is Rayuga's daughter, and later on the airship to Zeiss, it's confirmed.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, I'm not sure why we have this, I think, literally 5 minutes of what's the relationship before, yeah, it's what we were implying. But Walter killed Rayuga and confirms the Kilika connection.
I mean, there's more to the Kilika stuff that will be revealed later. I don't mind saying that, but what I really like about this scene in particular is that it gives a bit of a philosophical backing to Zin, that he has a certain way of thinking about things. It's not just that he's a nice guy, but it's part of his being a Taito warrior, is fighting for justice and pursuit of truth and protecting other people, which makes him a perfect fit for the Bracer Guild, right? It also demonstrates to us that Kilika is probably not as defenseless as one might think. Just being a bracer receptionist, she's also a martial artist in her own right. And it's not just a connection between Zin and Walter. It's a connection between Zin, Walter, and Kilika, who, before this point, you kind of just see as another receptionist, as another Jean, or another Elnin, or another Aina. But she is something more.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't think Kilika would be fucking gassed out like Elrond was, little shitbag.
No, Kilika probably wouldn't, but probably everybody else would be.
So that's chapter two. It was solid, I think a B for the main quest. Then we get to chapter three, the Mad Tea Party. And that it's a great chapter. For
Yeah.
me, it's an A.
No, I really like it.
It's in Grancel for like 80% of the chapter, but then we have a very brief side quest in the caverns again. And do we want to spend much or any time on this?
Well, I mean, I like the quest, the hotel missing guest, where you go back down to the limestone caverns. It's memorable because the boss fight fucking sucks. I hate that penguin, because it does something that I hate when bosses do, which is heal themselves, and also confusion is overpowered. However, besides the fact that boss sucks, it's a really nice callback to a side quest that you could have done in the first game, because you might have already met Jimmy before and helped him become a treasure hunter. And what I really like about this is that, okay, you meet him here, you've already met him before, so there's a continuity there. He picks up an artifact, or what appears to be an artifact, so it kind of ties in to this. This game has more of a focus on artifacts than the first one, I think it's safe to say. And guess what? He's on the airship going to Grancel with you. You can find him later on in the city, just walking around, going to the history museum or going to the church. It's this really nice bit of continuity that like travels with you throughout the entirety of the chapter, that makes Falcom world building one of the best there is.
Yeah, and the quartz you get, the yin yang quartz, is it OP? It prevents monsters from attacking you in the field. So no surprise attack. You can get the preemptive attack bonus whenever you want, and on the field, HP recovery at a fairly good clip.
So maybe I thought I equipped the yin yang quartz to Chloe, and I can tell you that I still got surprise attacked. So either I didn't equip it, or it's bugged,
Or maybe it's only a stealth.
or like the lead party member. That could be too. I don't know. I equipped it because it was more water quartz, which increases the amount of arts that you get, which is also nice. I wouldn't call it OP because I didn't notice it being OP.
Or at all working. But
Yeah, exactly.
so we go on a airship from Zeiss to Grancel, and I just thought there was a funny bit between Olivier, Zieg, and Chloe when Olivier is like, "Hey, honey, I could give you a private concert," and then Chloe's like, "Yeah, would it just be a private concert?" And Olivier responds, "I have no idea what nefarious motives you mean, but if it could be something more," and then he gets attacked by Zieg.
Which I think it's funny that you like the scene because you are very anti-Z last game.
I'm still anti the like weird human sentient character Zeke who can follow complex directions.
Or communicate complex directions.
Yes, but I always like seeing Olivier get some reality thrust in his face, which is why his interactions with Estelle are so good because she is having none of this shit.
Well,
She
like,
is done with it all.
name one character that Olivier talks to that puts up with his shit.
Vander.
Not even Vander. Vander is consistently saying, I will chop you in half if you say that we fuck again.
Well, he has a lot of sexual chemistry with Shira.
Yes, he
I'm
does.
gonna put this I'm gonna put this out there. They'd be a good couple.
Sure. I would just say when we get to Trails the Third, pay close attention to their relationship. So let's talk about this tripartite non-aggression pact. We talked a bit about it before, but now we have a little bit more details about what's behind it and people's attitudes towards it. And what I find fascinating is that basically everybody signing this piece of paper knows that it's a dead piece of paper. But they're still praising the Queen for doing it because to them, its function as a symbol is more important than the force behind the treaty.
A symbol for who? Who is the audience of the treaty, Colin, in your opinion? Who do you think?
I think that the audience is people in the Kingdom of Liberl, in the Empire of Erebonia, and the Republic of Calvard that wants to see more trade and less fighting. Something that the Calvard ambassador said that I thought was really interesting was that this treaty would allow Liberl to occupy a neutral zone in order to let Erebonia and Calvard carry out their disagreements in a diplomatic, peaceful manner. And they make this in connection with the Crossbell problem because that's a disputed piece of territory. Which we will be talking a lot. We'll be talking a lot about the Crossbell problem in a couple of months when we play through those games. So this is not by any means a minor issue. And if this is opening up a new venue to handle that problem, that is the benefit for both establishment of Erebonia and the establishment of Calvert.
So, do you think the people in these countries would have the opinion of Estelle, who kind of dumbly or maybe just naively she asks, is this going to outlaw war in a way that reminded me, I think intentional, of the Kellogg-Briand Pact of the late 1920s?
I mean, it's possible. I mean, you also have to keep in mind that we're dealing with three different political systems. It does seem like liberal is small enough and liberal enough, liberal, in order for people to be a little more in touch with politics so they can talk about it and stuff like that. And you can talk about politics in Erebonia, but the place is an empire. It's straight up, not an absolutist empire, but dominated from the top. Whereas with Calvert, you have a republic in which their like leadership decisions will be made on the basis of this or not. President Rocksmith is in right now. He might lose election because of this. We don't know. So I would, if we're talking about popular opinion, the only popular opinion that I think really matters is that in Calvert, and we won't know anything about Calvert's popular opinion until Kuro no Kiseki.
So I thought Chloe had a really surprising but interesting reaction because it was kind of cynical, which is unusual for her.
Okay.
She said there's no true enforcement mechanism beyond being known as a treaty breaker. But then she still thinks that it would be a bit of a deterrent because of that. So, Colin, my question for you is one, is this in character for Chloe? Is it a sign of her growth? And two, in a world where there's only three states that really matter, maybe three and a half, so what? Like, if two are fighting, what's it matter if Libero thinks, oh, you're the aggressor, you broke the treaty, versus, oh, you're the aggressor.
So I'll answer the first question first. I do think this is in character with Chloe. And I think that it's part of her. She needs to be a bit more political savvy in order to eventually become the queen, which is directly addressed in two different places in chapter 3. So very much a
Yeah.
character for her. I think it's a very well done point. But as for the what does it really matter? Well, I mean, first, I'm going to push back on your belief that only 3 states matter because Lehman State matters as the headquarters of the guild. The holy city of Arteria controls the church, which, as we've seen, has a military arm. There are a bunch of states in the north that are currently dominated but not yet conquered by, or in the process of being conquered by Erebonia. But they also house a lot of Jaeger units, which if they felt like they should lend their services in defense of someplace would be helpful. Though, of course, they're mercenaries, so that's another thing. But it depends. Also, if we accept your thesis that there are only 3 nations that matter, then and only two of them are equal powers, right? Erebonia and Calvert, which means Liberal is the wild card. And if they choose to decide with the people who are defending, all of a sudden the defense has the advantage.
My question for you is really about why do states act? Like if it's in liberal or crossbell or whatever self-interest to support the republic or the empire, what would it matter if they had broke the treaty, even though it may be in their interest to support one over the other? Like, would it change how they would act?
I mean, potentially. I mean, number one, it does depend on how much you care about popular opinion or elite opinion, even. But I think that it's easier to convince people to go along with you interfering in a third-party war if international norms have already been broken. Whereas if that norm hadn't been set and war was an acceptable thing, then it's a lot harder to say, oh, we should go into this war. So if we take an analog, let's say, for instance, we lived in a time in which war was pretty common, anywhere from the ancient world to the Middle Ages, through the early modern period, even into the pre-World War I era. War happened. Russia marching into Ukraine wouldn't seem to be that big of a deal. We might raise an eyebrow at it, but we're not that close to the Ukrainians. There is no real precedent. Like, yes, there's the idea of sovereignty, but it hasn't really been set in stone yet. Russia walks in, conquers them. There you go. But now, because we have this, the United Nations, because we have this idea of sovereignty, because we have the post-Cold War settlements, for the majority of the world, the invasion of Ukraine is a morally reprehensible thing, which helps give the different parties involved the political backing to keep giving aid to Ukraine, which, as we've seen, has allowed them to continue to survive. And I think that the same thing applies here.
But that's a completely different information and technological ecosystem of news and the like, because we are not given to understand, at least my impression, that the free press is something that really exists.
No, the free press
that
exists.
peop-
In liberal, the press is basically like the BBC, in which they might stop doing certain stories on the request of the army or on the request of the Queen. But in general, they are a free press. Calvert Press is definitely free. Crossbell Press is definitely free. Erebonian Press, not so free.
Okay, but I would just say I would be cautious about extending the comparison too far, given the just how information without the internet, without even radio or TV, maybe even telegraph, I'm not sure about that, would be so much longer and more distorted and harder to spread
Well,
from Calvert to liberal.
they definitely have some form of telecommunication because we see them talking on the phone.
But is that like, is it something where it's the 20s where having a phone is very, very unusual for private residences?
Sure, but private people don't get their news by talking to news organizations on the phone. They get it by reading the paper, and you can read a new issue of the Liberal News every time the chapter changes, and it's up to date.
Okay, so I'll accept that and move on. And you know what's up to date, Colin?
What?
Not letters, very slow way of sending information. However, chapter 3 is all about letters.
That was the worst transition you could have thought of. Oh my God.
I thought it was great.
So the main thrust of this chapter, at least to begin with, is that 9 letters have appeared, basically saying, "Hey, don't go through with this non-aggression pact. If you do, disaster will befall you." And it's sent to all the major players. It's sent to the embassy of Calvert, embassy of Erebonia, the church, the Queen, the Bracer Guild, Leiston Fortress, the news, the hotel, and I
The
forget.
hotel, yes, a major mover and shaker, the Ritz Marriott.
Well, I mean, people will stay there. And there's a ninth one that I've forgotten, but there were 9. They definitely said 9. And I know that you have complained about that because they act like 9 letters is a lot, and you don't think that 9 letters is a lot. I think it's more important that it shows that there's a coordinated effort of intimidation.
So I'll give you that this is someone trying to cause spooky stuff to stir up what is going to be an already volatile situation.
Yeah.
And then we have what I thought, and I was texting you about this,
Oh, yeah.
the weirdest, most boring, irrelevant B plot line. Yeah, this one girl's parents are missing. Go find them.
Yeah, this is not meaningfully relevant at the moment, right? But like it was so hard for me to keep my mouth shut because you were texting me this like, oh, this is irrelevant, this is boring. I went into a Discord that I'm on. I'm just like, oh, this sweet summer child, he has no clue what he's getting into.
But on the face of it is weird. I think it is weird how there are adults, strangers, maybe even foreigners walk in the palace or the royal villa, in the royal villa. And this is not like, holy shit, our security has been breached.
Well, like,
It's
okay, hold
more,
on.
let's get some contractors in.
I mean, come on. The first thing that people say when they walk into the royal villa is, wow, there are a lot of people here. This is open to the public. It's like Versailles. So it doesn't make a difference if they're Liberalians or Crossbellians. This is just a place people could go to for a picnic.
A place that was like 2 months ago the site of a coup.
Yeah, but it's not a site of a coup anymore. Now, one of the reasons why it's also relevant to Estelle and Co. is that it is the site. That's where the 9th letter went. It went to the villa because the villa is where the non-aggression pact is going to be signed. So we're kind of investigating that, and we're investigating this girl who, when we meet her, we realize we met her back in chapter 1, and it did not make any impression on Kevin whatsoever, so we didn't talk about it.
No, I mean, I had completely forgotten about her until we saw her again. And boy, is she relevant and memorable now.
Oh, yes. So do you want to talk about Red as a character?
Oh, yeah, I think she's great. She feels alive and present, and when she's in a scene, Colin, she is in a scene. Like, she does not dominate, but her presence or her absence is always felt. She feels real and a person.
I think she's really, really well written in from the standpoint of trying to see how a spoiled little brat of a kid would act. Because she's very bossy, right? And she's kind of competing with Tita a couple of times for Estelle's affection, yet at the same time is forming this relationship with Tita. Um, so we see her pull all of that off, and it comes off as completely natural. But what's interesting about Ren is that it's unclear how much of that is an act and how much of it isn't, because she's the angel of slaughter. She's enforcer number 15 of Ouroboros, who, when she sees, right before she sees Estelle, or right before she leaves Estelle at the end of the chapter, says, I was going to rip your heart out, but I like you, so I'm going to let you live. Bye bye.
Yeah, and okay, one we can talk later about. I should have guessed this because I made a point in guessing Joshua was an assassin because I thought that would be the most anime trope shit ever. So I should have guessed Ren being an enforcer would fit the mold to a T. But this bossy, spoiled little girl, like, you could say it's taken to the logical extreme, or it's an outgrowth or a compliment, but it feels very, yeah, that's correct. to have her also be the angel of slaughter, assassin, enforcer for the society, for the group. Like, this is how this kind of person would develop. Even when they're putting on a facade, it's still a bit unsettling, almost.
I mean, she strikes me as evil. And I don't say that a lot about different characters. And I like Red a lot as a character throughout the entirety of the series. But in this game in particular, she comes off as completely amoral and evil, but done so in a very compelling way. And we see this, and we'll talk about this a bit more, but like she seems to genuinely like Estelle and company. She says this straight up in a place where she wouldn't lie. But it's still wrapped up in this aura of I'm going to murder them if they don't do what I want them to do.
Yeah, like, I like you. That's why you're alive.
Yeah.
And it's just so well done. Like, her relationship with Tita, one, it's recontextualized once after the reveal, but two, it still feels like she liked Tita.
She says she genuinely had fun hanging out with her.
And I still think she could like her and have fun, and that could coexist with her deciding Tita has to die and then doing it.
Yeah.
And it's it's tough writing kids, and it's tough writing Assassin Kid without being like, this is so cute. You think you're funny and evil, but no, there's menace about them.
Yeah, yeah. It comes off as cute and then it quickly becomes not cute in a way that when you first see it, you're like, whoa, holy shit. But I will also say that playing through this chapter with the knowledge that I have, there are a couple of places in which that guard is dropped that I know that you didn't notice, and precisely because you're not supposed to notice it. But like when you're passing by Philip, Ren all of a sudden stops and in complete senses, not speaking like a little kid, says, that man is more than he seems. And she makes up some excuse of, oh, his eyes are squinty, but he can see. But I'm pretty sure, and it was at the end of the last game, that Philip did some fighting. If it's not at the end of this game, it definitely happens. The man is more than he seems.
I mean, I noticed and I texted you about it, but my thing was only on Philip. Like, I had almost forgotten that it was Ren who said that.
Yeah,
But I was thinking more, oh, I wonder what Philip is in actuality.
right. It made you suspicious of Philip. But with my hindsight, I can say, no, I'm suspicious of Ren for noticing that.
And what else about Ren kind of dropping the facade, maybe on purpose, maybe on accident?
I think that she acts a bit too much like she knows who Joshua is. Yes, Estelle tells her some details, but then she makes some you could say deductions by implication, but they're deductions by implication that you would come to if you already knew who Joshua was. And she does know who Joshua was. She actually has a very decent personal relationship with him, which she reveals at the end of the chapter. So it's stuff like that, that once you see the context, you see how everything she says has not a dual meaning, but some stuff does.
And you know how you said Ren, that girl is evil, Colin?
Yeah.
Well, the way she talks about Joshua in the very end of the chapter, that it's I think it is kind of evil. Like, it's very nonchalant how she talks about Joshua to Estelle, knowing what a huge issue, gaping wound it is.
Yeah.
And I thought it was great.
Now, I mean, there is a part we should point out that Ren is under the impression that the reason why Josh is not coming back to Ouroboros is because of Estelle, which she appears to have taken to mean that Estelle is actively stopping Joshua from coming back, and she wants Joshua to come back. What's his face? Weissman comes in and kind of, flim-flams that a little bit, massages it, but then makes it Ren's goal in order to convert Estelle to the cause of Ouroboros. But I think I'm bringing that point up because it shows that Ren is driven by something. She's driven by the fact that she has this relationship with Joshua and she wants Joshua back. And it just so happens that her means of getting that, because of her understanding of who Estelle is, puts her at odds with Estelle and company.
And in this scene, we see dissension, internal conflict in the ranks of the society. with Ren, with Lawrence, and with the Edgelord boy dude,
Campanella.
Campanella, and how it's like, don't let Weissman know all this. Keep some secrets from him. Work at cross purposes a bit.
Yeah, I mean, something that Luva says that is very important to keep in mind is that nobody is supposed to work for Ouroboros um, unless they want to, unless they have their will. And that's really important because it's showing that everybody has their own agendas and everybody has their own actions that they want to take, and they're not always going to be in harmony.
No, two things. One, we hear another mention of the Grand Master. It's a reminder Weissman is not the top dog.
No.
And two, this really sets this society is the dark mirror, the foil to the Bracer Guild.
Yeah, in some ways, sure.
And brave people who join of their own free will to change the world, not helping individual case by case, but to change the institutions, the way the world works.
I believe that you are reading into Ouroboros what you want to read in. We don't know their plan. We know that they have a plan, and we know that they are doing stuff. We don't know what that plan is.
I will read whatever the heck I want into them.
Okay. Is there anything else that you want to talk about, Ren, before we move on to Chloe a little bit? Because we should talk about her interactions with the Queen and with Dunan.
Okay, so let's talk a bit about the boss fight with Kanone and the organ wheel.
Sure.
Organ wheel.
Which I just want to point out, it's really nicely named, the boss, because Kanone makes an allusion to Operation Restore the Burl's Pride. And organ wheel, or how you pronounce that, is a word meaning filled with pride.
I thought as a mechanics for gameplay, it was really well done because the tank could like run you over, adding movement as the spatial awareness is even more important to be cognizant of, to have in your mind, moving about, don't get clustered up. But then that means AoE healing is a lot more difficult with AoE buffs. It was a great boss fight.
In terms of mechanics, I agree with you that the ability for the tank to run you over adds a fantastic dimension to your planning. I will say, and maybe it's because I'm a little bitch, I did feel like the tank took too little damage. It took way too long to take it down. Because
18,000 health? Yeah.
And it with very high defense, too. And it's not like you're playing with your A team. You're playing with characters who you have not played with before, other than Estelle. Because you were playing with Agate, I was playing with Shara, who I didn't pick. We were playing with Kevin, who, I mean, his S break doesn't even do any damage. It's overpowered in a way, but it doesn't do any damage. And then you're playing with Julia, who you have had no practice with using whatsoever. And then as soon as we finish that fight, we get put into another fight. And you think that fight's going to be easy, Kevin, because you're like, they wouldn't give us an entire different boss fight without even healing my characters or giving me a chance to save right after another boss fight. And that fight was tough too.
Yeah. It's something like, oh, I would suspect this later on in the game, not a third of the way through thereabouts.
Yeah. Now, SC is Kuro no Kiseki might be giving SC a run for its money, but in terms of difficulty, this is the hardest game in the series, and it's because of stuff like this.
Damn.
So yeah,
Julia, what do you have to say about Julia?
I mean,
not Julia. The person Julia has a secret burning passion for that she can never hope to realize because of the difference in stations.
Who the fuck are you talking about?
Chloe.
Okay, that's one way to read their relationship, sure. So one thing we need to talk about with Chloe is that I had talked a bit when we were doing our evaluation of the last game, that Chloe goes through an arc in which she accepts her place as queen. And I still hold that to be true. But this game is showing us that while she has accepted the fact that she can be and should be queen, she has not yet made the changes that she needs to make to be the queen. That is, to be more politically savvy, to be more of a leader, to be more decisive. All are things that Dunan has in extremis, which is a problem too, because he's also a a weeaboo who likes to stay in his room, read magazines, drink wine, and eat donuts, which I completely understand with, but I'm not in charge of a country. So we see her reflect on that. We see her reflect on that with Dunan. If you don't bring her, as you know, then Agate or Shera has that conversation. The same points are made, essentially. And then she's also having it with the queen herself. And there, I think we see a really interesting side to it, because the queen, her grandmother, is saying, like, as my granddaughter, you need to think more politically. You need to think more realistically. And this is the most ideal queen that we have, right? She's the one orchestrating this toothless peace agreement that does have some kind of teeth. And people praise her for that. But even she's saying, like, in my idealism, there is realism, and you have to identify that.
Yeah. I mean, Chloe in the FC is naive.
Yeah.
Not as much as Estelle, but still, she has not been exposed to evil, to badness, to people who want to do her harm, even to crime.
Now she's being, well, she went through some of that when she, fought against Richard and everything in the last game, which was a good growth moment for her. But we're seeing her recognize her naivete and now taking steps to combat that naivete, which, as my mother used to tell me, the first step to fixing a problem is knowing that you have one. And then I always wondered why it wasn't just enough to know that I have one and then move on. And she never accepted that as a proper answer.
I mean, as someone who's perfect, I cannot comment directly.
That's what my
But
mother used to say. Go on.
I think it's interesting how the growth we see of Chloe is really not how she interacts with the people around her, but it's more in statecraft. It's more abstract about
Yeah.
the Non-Aggression Pact and how it's not worth all that much. But we still see her as like a fundamentally good kind person in her interactions with other people. It's not like she's forgotten or she's who she is. It's not like she's changed who she is, where she's unrecognizable. Like you can't, she's not who she was. It's a natural evolution. It's an addition.
Right. And it's why she's going to be a better queen than Dunan would be a king. Because while
Yeah.
Dunan has a lot of these abstract qualities that could make him a good statesman, he lacks the personal virtues that would make him into a great statesman. And you can learn the statesman-esque qualities. You can't learn your innate goodness qualities. At least I don't think so. Some people think that you can. But, this is something that Chloe is much more suited for as a person.
Yeah. And it's a good arc so far, and I'm looking forward to seeing where it goes.
Why don't we talk about the spec ops? Because I know that you got some opinions about it.
Oh, I disliked the Spec Ops and Ven's appearance. So, what connects the two? Agate or Shira and Analyst, whoever you didn't pick, they go and see into the mines near Volant, and they see a base of Spec Ops. You fight them, and then the door gets blasted open to the mine, and they all die.
By the way, this is not the mine near Roland. This is the mine near Revenue Village.
Okay, so my mistake. But explosion happens, they all die. Ven's parents, when she reveals herself in the dock's warehouse, they just drop. You think they're dead from the roof of the building to the floor. In both these cases, it's revealed they are orbital puppets, robots, androids, so to speak. And to me, this I thought great. This is the first on-screen depiction of death in the game. It's stepping up a notch, but it just there's no consequence. There's no follow through. It just feels cheap to me.
I mean, I think that there's only no consequences if you think that these are actually real people, but they never were. Ouroboros is experimenting with the creation of new archaisms, which is something that Kevin and Estelle talk about when they have to fight them on the wall. So essentially, by creating robotic soldiers, by creating these dolls that Ren is able to control, this is showing the depths of Ouroboros' technical mastery, which is a really important facet of that organization. On top of that, when it comes to Estelle's parents specifically, it's kind of telegraphed that something is off with them. When you go around different places asking about them, what almost everybody will say is that something seemed off with the parents. They had a very distant stare. They didn't really seem to care about anything. They weren't very attentive. And it's because they're automatons.
I mean, I just thought it was because they're raising a very entitled, precocious 8-year-old girl. I mean, shit. I just feel the same way.
I mean, and I think you're supposed to feel that way when you first run into that. But with hindsight, you realize that this is actually why.
I mean, I see it, I guess, but it also maybe it's just a bee in my bonnet.
I think you respect the series so much that you read some of your own expectations into the moves that they pull instead of trying to approach the moves that they pull and understand where they're coming from in their own right.
Approaching the what?
The moves that they're trying to pull, like with the Spec Ops stuff.
Ah,
Like your criticism only makes sense if you think that they shouldn't have been robots to begin with.
yeah, and like I guess I just thought like take Kanone, for example. It's framed in this very personal thing, like with her and Julia when they were at the academy, and that's a huge motivator for Kanone. It's what brings her to surrender. We don't get as much a sense of this person committed treason, most likely killed people, cavorted with known enemies of the state, and like I agree with her. She should be facing a firing squad. Like, but it's framed this and with her thing with Richard, it's framed these very individual terms like she's hurting these people that we know of. And if they forgive her, it's okay. Whereas the abstract harm she did and tried to do can be swept under the rug.
So I see where you're coming from. I really do. I think that this scene shows Richard's multidimensionalness as a character. Because you're right that in his efforts to increase the power of the state, he ultimately became an enemy of the state. And he led a lot of people to become enemies of the state, including Kanone, who is definitely like his number two most ardent follower. It's why she's trying to lead an operation to save him, to rescue him right now in the middle of this chapter. However, I believe that Richard sees her and says, I misled you into doing this. And Kanone's like, no, 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 no. I followed you of my own free will. And Richard goes, no, I manipulated you so that you would do it. Richard didn't manipulate them.
No.
They did follow Richard of their own free will. He's taking that stance to cover for them because he still cares about those who cared about him. There's a loyalty there. There's a loyalty there shared on both sides. It's also true that Richard has realized the error of his ways and is cooperating with the state, and so is trying to bring his followers in line with the expectations of the state. But I think that this also shows Richard's, I don't know if I really want to put it this way, but his innate goodness on a personal level towards his subordinates.
And I think that's a good way of putting it. His innate goodness towards his subordinates. Whereas I don't give a fuck that he's a good boss. What I care is about what did he do structurally to the institutions, to the functioning of the state? What would be the consequences if he won? If he's a kind person who remembers their birthdays, who is loyal, who tries to shield them from harm for following him and his vision, that's not really relevant to he led a coup because he's scared and cannot deal with his fear.
I mean, he dealt with his fear by identifying what was causing it and trying to change it. I mean, I don't want to be a coup defender here. I'm typically anti-coup, but I don't think that you can claim that Alan Richard lacks courage or lacks direction or even lacks patriotism.
No, he has the qualities of a villain.
He also has the qualities of a hero.
But it's okay. I'm going to quote Brooklyn Nine-Nine.
A great source of wisdom.
Cool motive, still murder.
Fair enough. I think that's a good way to end the podcast.
So, question of the week for you all. What should be done to the conspirators, to Kanone, to Doonan, to Richard, to the rank and file? What do you think? Is the game being too lenient? Is it good? Tell us your thoughts, whether it's Twitter or email.
Yeah, I mean, I think we disagree on this question. I think I'm more lenient. I mean, I can see leniency here because of the nature of this coup. It wasn't like he was a demagogue. But I don't know. I'm divided because, as I say, I'm typically anti-coup. Um, but yeah, is there anything else you want to talk about?
No, I thought chapter three was excellent, and I'm so excited to see what this builds into chapter four. Cannot wait to get into that. That'll be in 2 weeks. Next week, we got a sidebar. Not sure the topic yet, but as always, it'll be a good one. And also, if you think there's a sidebar topic or something you would like us to discuss, whether it's about the game or something about RPGs or games in general, let us know. We're always happy to broaden our discussions.
Yeah, we have a document in which we just list all the ideas that we have, whether they're specific to trails or even wider stuff. Something that we had just put on our list the other day was, are Jedi cultic theocratic zealots or not? That's coming to you in December.
Yes, I think they're awful, awful people. Colin disagrees.
The Jedi are admirable. They should be emulated, and they are fantastic peacekeepers until they become militarized by the state that they love so much. But that is neither here nor there. Why don't you take us out?
Okay, I'm Kevin. That's Colin, Jedi Wannabe. See you next time.
Thanks, everybody, for listening. Bye bye.